Okay, guys, I'm going to walk you through the 1.11 lesson today. So once you're logged in to your OLS, you go to classes. This is the best way to get there. You would see all of your classes, but since I only teach English, that's all I can see. And then from there, up here, you would see your grade, your progress, and if you have any overdues. Below that would be your Class Connect sessions. Below that is the 3-week at a glance. This is what you should go by, what to do each day, not so much what's over here in the class planner. Sometimes it pulls in correctly. So be looking here to see what you need to work on. Below that is the class newsletter, and this is where you can find these tutorial videos along with many other things. I always give you an overview of what should have been completed in the past, what we're working on for the present week. When I get there, we've done a lot so far this semester. I will probably curtail that down this next time. What we're doing in the present and what's coming up, like a brief overview of what's coming up in the future. And I have my PowerPoint slides accessible at this website. And this week's OLS lessons, of course, the 109, 110 will go down to previous week when I update this. And there's where you can find all the previous recordings if you need them. All right, let's get started. So the best place to go to get to your lessons is through content. Always check your grades on Monday. Email, grades, and this calendar. Always check and that newsletter. Those are things to always check out first thing Monday morning, or in this case Tuesday, since we have no class on Monday due to President's Day. All right, so we're going to click content to get to our assignments. And we are working on 111 equality. And you always want to do this lesson introduction because it will have the study guide in there. That is so important to help follow along and do things. All right, it says equality introduction. Mahatma Gandhi organized the people of India to oppose the injustice they faced. Today, you will meet another man who used nonviolence to stand against the injustice directed towards his people, African Americans. This man fought injustice by working within the law to change it. And as you see down here, let me make this a little bit wider here. You can see that we have one of two slides. So we're going to go ahead and slide over to the second slide before we press this forward button. If you forget, you can always go back and hit the back button. And there is our student guide. So it's always good to review that. Go ahead and download it. And it says Mahatma Gandhi organized the people of India to fight nonviolent the injustice they faced. We've already read that. Okay, describe the lesson objectives. We're going to describe characters by speech, actions, and interactions with others, identify character traits and motivations, and make inferences and draw conclusions. To prepare, the approximate lesson time is about 60 minutes. And you will need to go ahead and download this graphic organizer. I like to go ahead and download all my materials. Sometimes you'll have vocabulary here as well, but we don't have any of that. But look at these questions that we have here. So let me open this real quick. Let me open the graphic organizer. And in order to be able to type on it, you need to click on this Enable Editing. And you can put your name right there on top. And it will allow you to go in here and type. So we'll do that as we're reading the story, but we don't need it right now. Okay. So it says, look at these questions. I would copy and paste these into your review document and answer those, because those are probably questions that you're going to see on the quiz. So it also says, answer the following question about Thurgood Marshall. And we won't be able to do this till after we do the reading, of course. But as always, you know, having good test taking strategies, let's look at those questions so that as we're reading, we'll be like, oh, yeah, it's going to ask me about this. I might want to highlight this. Number one, why did Marshall face opposition in the African American community? Number 2, explain why Marshall did not believe society could be separate but equal. 3, the author notes that a fellow Supreme Court justice said of Marshall, "No American did more to lead our country out of the wilderness of segregation." Look up the word wilderness in the dictionary. Why is segregation described as a wilderness? Could you say that all injustice is a wilderness? Explain your answer. Well, when it tells me to look up something, I'm going to go ahead and go to Webster Dictionary. And I'm just going to go ahead and look up this word wilderness. And it says wilderness. 1, a tract or region uncultivated and uninhabited by human beings. 2, an area essentially undisturbed by human activity, together with its naturally developed life community. Could be. All right, here the B is an empty or pathless area or region. Okay, C, a part of a garden devoted to wild growth. Okay. All right, 2, obsolete, wild, or uncultivated state. That could be more fitting in the way it's being used there. Let's see. 3, a confusing multitude or mass, an indefinitely great number or quantity. I could not have given it for a wilderness of monkeys. Probably not. B, a bewildering situation, those moral wilderness of civilized life. Perhaps. Okay. And some synonyms for wilderness is nature, open, open air, out of doors, outdoors, wild. Okay. So that's what I like to do when it says to look up a word. Just go ahead and look it up. All right. Then you go back over here. And since we have went over the student guide, we are ready to move forward to the Learn Module 1. Discriminating against African Americans. After the Civil War ended, slavery was illegal in the United States. But many people, particularly in the southern states that had formed the Confederacy, still believed that African Americans were not entitled to the same rights as whites. For many years, those states' laws kept blacks and whites separate through segregation. People from the two groups did not share schools, water fountains, public restrooms, restaurants, hotels, train cars, movie theaters, or even hospitals. During the two world wars, black enlisted men were not allowed to fight alongside white soldiers. Even though World War II was fought to preserve freedom in Europe and America, races were still kept in separate groups. And here's one of the signs that might have hung on one of those businesses. Thurgood Marshall. Before you read about Marshall's life, take a moment to check out a film of what must have been an exciting day for him and his family. Okay, and so this is a film. I'm not going to play it here. I'm going to assume you're going to watch it and have no trouble there. If you need the text transcript, you have difficulty hearing it, or you're auditorily impaired, please click on the text transcript. Change is slow. Conditions for African Americans during Marshall's time were often challenging. Whites had more job opportunities and a higher average income, so more money went into white public schools and neighborhoods. African American characters were almost never seen in movies or on television, and when they were, the characters were usually servants. Tensions rose as African Americans became more and more discontent with their status. White juries often pushed black crime far more harshly than white crime. Much of the white population lived in fear that the blacks would rise up against the whites. Though change was slow for decades, in the 1950s and 1960s finally brought some significant changes for African Americans. Now you will read about one black man, a great lawyer named Thurgood Marshall, whose skill in the courtroom helped bring about those changes. So we're on slide 404, so that means we are ready to go up to the top, or you have it down here to move forward to Module 2. Marshall's influence. Next, you will read an informational piece about the life and work of Thurgood Marshall. What type of things do you expect to learn as you read? Please remember to make predictions based on the type of text and topic. So right now, before we even start, pause this video and write down a couple of things that you're going to read about. Now that you've got those things, that pre-reading activity done, we're going to read Equal Justice Under the Law of Thurgood Marshall. Use the reading graphic organizer to apply those strategies. So we've already got our graphic organizer pulled up, right? Oh, that's not it. Hold on. Let me pull up my graphic organizer. Let's see, that was a Word document right here. Okay. So I'm going to just move it off to the side for right now. That was not it at all. Okay, where is it? Hold on. I've got so much stuff pulled up here. I'm so sorry. I should have cleared all this out before. Let me pause the recording here for a second till I get this pulled up. Okay, I've got this pulled up. I'm gonna go ahead and type my name. And I'm gonna go ahead and save this. So file, save as this PC. And I just wanna make sure that it says 1.111. And I'm gonna just put graphic organizer. And save. All right, and then I'm just gonna move this off to my second screen for right now. But I have it pulled up ready to move back over. And we're going to read Equal Justice Under Law. To do that, you just click right here and it should take us right to the story. If it doesn't, okay, in this case, excuse me, it took us to our literature book, but the main cover. Remember, we're in Unit 1, which is titled Influential People. So if this isn't already here laid out, like, okay, it doesn't have that, you could click on that little arrow to drop down. And there it is, Equal Justice Under the Law, Thurgood Marshall. So, and it'll take you, so it's on page 335. Let me write that down. Page 335 in your textbook. Equal Justice Under Law, Thurgood Marshall by Mara Rockcliffe. At his school in Baltimore, Maryland, in the early 1900s, Thurgood Marshall may have been one of the smartest boys in class, but he was not exactly well behaved. If he wasn't throwing chalk or teasing girls, he was arguing with teachers. So one day, the principal sent him to the basement with a copy of the United States Constitution and stern orders to not come back up till he had memorized a passage. And stern means firm and serious. Before I left that school, Marshall said many years later, I knew the whole thing by heart. Parts of the Constitution, however, confused the young Marshall. For example, the 14th Amendment clearly stated that all Americans must be treated equally under the law. But growing up in Baltimore in the 1920s, Marshall knew that they were not. Like other southern states at the time, Maryland enforced a strict system of segregation. Everywhere African Americans were kept apart, on buses and trains, in restaurants and hotels and schools. Anything from a water fountain to a movie theater or public park might have a sign saying whites only. Even the United States Supreme Court supported these unjust laws. In 1896, the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, the court had ruled that segregation was allowed under the Constitution. The facilities for Black Americans, the court said, simply had to be as good as those for whites, separate but equal. So facilities mean buildings and resources. In reality, separate almost never meant equal. For example, while Marshall earned high grades in college, the all-white law school of the University of Maryland refused to admit him. Maryland had no law school for African Americans. Determined to become a lawyer anyway, he enrolled instead at Howard University in Washington, D.C., one of the few institutions that welcomed African Americans as students. Marshall left law school eager to win justice for his people. Back in Baltimore, he became known as the little man's lawyer. often taking on cases without being paid. Soon, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, asked him to join their legal team. He took charge, becoming known as Mr. Civil Rights. He helped organize a boycott of businesses that refused to hire African Americans. And a boycott is its protest by refusing to buy from or deal with. He successfully sued local school boards that paid Black teachers less than half as much as white teachers. He even won a case against the University of Maryland, and the result of the decision was that the university had to admit its first Black law student. In 1950, a group of African American parents in Clarendon County, South Carolina, asked the NAACP for help. Schools in Clarendon County were separate and far from equal. White children rode buses to modern brick schools with libraries and playgrounds. Black children walked miles past the white schools to cramped, unheated wooden shacks without enough desks and chairs or even any bathrooms. The parents took the all-white school board to court, hoping to win a decent education for their children. But Marshall wanted more. He wanted to persuade the court that segregation itself was wrong, and the whole idea of separate but equal was fundamentally unjust, and fundamentally means in the most centrally important way. To show that segregation made Black children feel inferior, and inferior means less worthy, Marshall brought in a respected psychologist named Kenneth Clark. Clark described a simple test he had performed on more than 200 African American children in segregated schools. He showed each child 2 white dolls and 2 brown dolls. When he asked which dolls they liked best, the children said the white dolls were nice and pretty. The brown dolls, they said, were ugly and dirty. When Clark asked one little girl which doll was most like her, she burst into tears. Despite Clark's dramatic testimony and other evidence that Marshall presented, the court ruled that Clarendon County could satisfy the law by spending money to improve Black schools. In other words, the court allowed the schools to remain separate and only required that the county spend more money to make them equal. According to this ruling, segregation was still legal. Marshall was disappointed, but he was not discouraged. He had a new plan to take the fight against school segregation to the Supreme Court of the United States. Marshall and his team of lawyers began gathering cases. One was the Clarendon County case. Others came from Virginia, Kansas, Delaware, and Washington, D.C. The whole group of cases was known by the name of the first schedule to be heard, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Marshall faced opposition even within the African American community. Some said that America was not ready for desegregation. If you challenge separate but equal, they said, we might lose even what we have already gained. Others supported Marshall. We want our rights now, not a century hence, they said. And hence means from now in the future. Marshall worked tirelessly on the case, hardly stopping to eat or sleep. Finally, on a cold December morning in 1952, Marshall stood looking up at the Supreme Court building. High above him, giant letters carved into the white marble spelled out equal justice under law. On this cold day, he hoped he would help those words become reality. Hundreds of spectators, Black and white, crowded the steps. Inside, hundreds more jammed the halls leading to the packed courtroom. Marshall's opponent was a well-known lawyer named John W. Davis. Marshall greatly admired Davis as a law student and had sometimes skipped class to see Davis argue cases before the Supreme Court. Davis seemed unbeatable. Marshall repeated the argument he had made in South Carolina. Segregation hurt Black children. There was no reason for it other than to keep one race up and the other down. African Americans were not receiving equal treatment under the law. Davis argued that since the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court had upheld the idea of separate but equal. Segregation was a fact of Southern life. Why, asked Davis, would Black parents want their children in a school where they would be rejected or hated? In the South, Marshall responded. He had seen white and Black children walking down the road together. They said They separate and go to different schools, he said, and they come out and they play together. In other words, children did not choose segregation. They would learn to accept integrated schools. Davis remained confident. On his way out of the courtroom, he whispered to a colleague, which is a coworker, "I think we've got it won." An exhausted Marshall thought so too. As always, Davis had argued with great skill and poise. And poise means composure, confidence. And the law was on his side. Marshall had little hope that the Supreme Court would admit that they had been wrong for so many years. But 6 months passed and no decision came. Instead, the court asked that the lawyers on both sides for more information. What they asked was the original intent or aim or purpose or goal of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. That amendment says no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So abridge means to take away from or to cut from, and immunities means protections of citizens. Nor shall any state deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. The Supreme Court wanted to know, does that language allow separation of the races? Does the court have the power to outlaw school segregation? It was a second chance. Marshall gathered 85 experts, historians, sociologists, or scholars who study the way people function in society, educators to help him prepare his answer. Week after week, they planned, talked, and argued together late into the night. At last, the day arrived. Marshall was ready. In a voice that boomed off the high ceiling of the crowded room, he made his case. Segregation, he urged, was unconstitutional. What reason could there be for separating the two races, he asked, unless the court found that for some reason Negroes are inferior to all other human beings? As he spoke, Marshall seemed to embody the very point he was arguing. He was knowledgeable, well-spoken, a brilliant lawyer, and African American. Clearly, race had nothing to do with intelligence. After this second round of arguments was finished, again, the months dragged by with no decision from the court. Marshall went back on the road for the NAACP, trying to raise money to pay the organization's enormous legal bills. Then, one night in May, after a fundraiser in Mobile, Alabama, the phone rang. Marshall was scheduled to speak in Los Angeles the next day. "Catch the next flight to Washington, D.C., the caller said. "The Supreme Court is ready to announce its decision." By early afternoon of the next day, Marshall found himself seated, shifting nervously in the lawyers' section of the Supreme Court, moving from side to side. Chief Justice Earl Warren began to read the court's opinion. It was long and detailed. He discussed the history of segregation. He gave the legal background. He talked about the importance of education. Which way had the court decided? Marshall couldn't tell. He stared at one of the justices, a Southerner. Marshall was sure he would fight for segregation. The justice stared back. Finally, Chief Justice Warren got to the heart of the matter. Did sending Black children to separate schools, no matter how good those schools might be, deprive them of an equal opportunity for education? Warren concluded, "We believe that it does. To separate some children from others for no reason but skin color," he went on, "could affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely ever to be undone." The decision was unanimous. All 9 justices agreed. Separate schools could never be equal. Segregation must go. Marshall said later, "I was so happy I was numb." Over the course of his career with the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall argued 32 cases before the Supreme Court. He won all but 3, and in 1967, President Lyndon Johnson appointed him to the Supreme Court, where he served for 24 years. But to many, Brown versus the Board of Education remained his greatest victory. A fellow Supreme Court justice said of Marshall, "No American did more to lead our country out of the wilderness of segregation." And I believe that's where it ends. Yeah. All right, and so then we'll go back. We have finished Module 2, but we do need to fill out our graphic organizer, so I'm going to bring it back. What type of text is it? Is it a memoir, a narrative, an autobiography, an expository, informational? What is it? Put your answer. How do you know what type of text this is? What features does it have that tell you it's this type of text? Again, type in your answer. Make predictions. So go back and look at those predictions. What things did you think you were going to learn about based on the title, the images, how the text was organized? Okay, now while we were reading, check your predictions. Were your predictions correct? If not, what was different? What is the purpose for writing? Why? What was the author's goal of writing this story? How is the text arranged? Is it in chronological order? Does it have flashbacks in it? After reading, check the accuracy of your predictions. Did you confirm them, or do you need to revise them or change them? What is the main idea of the text? Definitely write this down. This is always a good one to answer. Remember, the main idea is different from theme. Theme is the message. Remember theme, Theme, message, whereas main idea is specifically what it's talking about. And usually it's like the first sentence or two of the story, generally. One piece of information that supports the main idea. Another piece of information. So you always want to get two to back yourself up. Give an example of a fact. So go in there and look for a fact. Go in there and also look for an example of an opinion. And what is the author's tone or attitude in this text? Do you think he agreed with Thurgood Marshall's thinking? Or do you think he disagreed or she disagreed? All right, once you have that answered, save it, leave it pulled up. And move on to Module 3. Now it says, check your reading. After you finish reading Equal Justice Under the Law, Thurgood Marshall, answer the questions. What I do here is I always pull up a new Word document. So to do so, hit that Windows button down here in the bottom left and pull up a new Word document. Oh, and it pulled it up on the next page, which is fine and dandy. Oh, I pulled the wrong thing. Hold on. Give me 1 second. It's not wanting to pull it over very easy. Okay, here we go. This is what it will pull up. And you want to just click a blank document. You want a new one. And I would like to title this 1.11 Review Questions or Study Guide or however you want to put it, just review. Okay. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to copy and paste. So right click and copy, or highlight it and put Control V. Hold down the Control button and click the V button on your keyboard. Control and C to copy. And then it's Control and V to paste. And I like to go ahead and highlight it like this. And I like to do a right click. And I like to paste this way because then I can make it look how I want it to look. Oh, all right, hold on. It didn't do what I wanted it to do. Let's try that again. Well, it still didn't do it. Probably because I did it the other way first. But I'll change it back to where it's 11, and that will get it more consistent with what we're doing. So that's our question. I'm going to dip down. Once you know what your correct answer is, and we'll do this first one together. So how was Thurgood Marshall first introduced to the Constitution? A, his grandfather taught him. B, his whole class recited it for a school program. C, he had to memorize some of it as punishment in school. Or D, he attended a court case and heard about it. I'm going to just say, I know this is wrong, but click here just to show you what happens. Oh, I got it wrong. So you can always try again. And he had to memorize it as punishment. That is our correct answer. So then you're going to, again, copy. And I like to put A, colon, and then if you right click, you get these options where you can make it look like, and see that's the one that will make it look like everything else. And you might even want to number this one as number 1. Tab that over. And backspace out and do number 2. And so on and so forth till you go through. Anytime, if you'll do this anytime you see questions and have that pulled up when you take your quiz, that's a lot of times where they pull their questions from, either those graphic organizers or the study guides, like those questions that were on the study guide. So yeah, don't forget the study guide here. Where was it? Don't forget to answer these questions, okay? Why did Marshall face opposition in the African American community? Explain why Marshall did not believe society could be separate but equal. And what did the word wilderness, how did that, no American did more to lead our country out of the wilderness of segregation. We looked up the word wilderness. Why do you think he might have used that term, okay, to describe what Marshall was doing? Answer these questions. Have those pulled up as well, along with this review document. Okay, question number 2, and I'm going to read all this to you. And it says, correct, the principal sent Marshall to memorize part of the Constitution. Select the words that best describe Marshall. So again, on this one, what you do is you would copy and you would paste it. Oh, stop me. It'll be up here. I'm going to do this one so that, oh, no, that's not what I'm going to do. No, yes. But I'm going to do this and do answer. And you may have more than one answer here because this is multiple ones. So what you want to do is figure out which ones are correct, and you would highlight all of those and put those as the answer. Okay. And it says, select the words that best describe Marshall: determined, persuasive, hostile, intelligent. 3 out of those are going to be correct. When you know the answer, be sure you copy and paste those into your review document. Then you're ready to move on to this 3rd question. What did segregation affect in America? Select all of the correct answers. So again, you're going to have more than one. Did it affect schools, hospitals, transportation, public parks? When you know the correct answers, copy the question and correct answers into your review document. And then you're ready to move to the next one. Marshall took on cases without being paid. What conclusion can you draw about him from this fact? A, he was already wealthy. B, he cared more about correcting injustice than about making money. C, he did not pay for his own lawyer. Or D, he was a troublemaker who hated all white people. Check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, be sure that you copy and paste the question and correct answer into your review document. And you're ready to move on to the last question. Excuse me. How did Marshall show the negative effect of segregation in his famous case, Brown versus Board of Education? A, he invited Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to speak in court. B, he brought in a psychologist who showed that segregation had a negative effect on the hearts and minds of children. C, he privately convinced the opposing lawyer John W. Davis to concede Marshall's argument. Or D, he organized the NAACP to write petitions. When you know the correct answer, check your answer. When you know it's correct, copy and paste the question and correct answer into your review document. And now that we have gone through all of these, we are ready to move forward to Module 4. Which sentence illustrates Marshall's actions? Read the following paragraph to discover Marshall's actions. Back in Baltimore, he became known as the little man's lawyer, often taking on cases without being paid. Soon, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, asked him to join their legal team. He took charge, becoming known as Mr. Civil Rights. He helped organize a boycott of businesses that refused to hire African Americans. He successfully sued local school boards that paid Black teachers less than half as much as the white teachers. He even won a case against the University of Maryland. The result of the decision was that the university had to admit the first Black law student. All right, so think about it. Which sentences illustrate Marshall's actions? Once you think you have those highlighted and know which ones, click the reveal. I would go back and copy and paste this again into your review document. So it looks like taking on cases without being paid, took change, helped organize the boycott, successfully sued local school boards, and even won a case. Action verbs help illustrate specific actions taken by Marshall. And then we have slide 2. So we're going to go to slide 2. Traits needed. What character traits would help a lawyer fight injustice through the courts? Think about your answer. Maybe jot down a few and then check your answer. Characteristics of successful lawyers working for justice might include intelligence, determination, perseverance, hard work, eloquence, ambition, idealism, and the ability to bounce back from frustration. Marshall possessed all of those. And now, since we're on slide 2 of 2, we're ready to advance to module 5. Marshall's thinking. Thurgood Marshall's ideas were considered revolutionary for many Americans, yet he pushed on. Think about the following questions. Number 1, why did Marshall face opposition in the African American community? Remember, this is one of the questions on that our sheet here. Hold on. Wrong one. Right here. Why did Marshall? Okay, so pay attention, because when we find the answer here, guess what you can do? Copy and paste it, and I would do it in that review document. I would copy and paste this question and your response to it in that review document. So it's all in one place for you. Why did Marshall? Okay, so shouldn't the community have been unanimous, which means all in agreement, in its support for Marshall's idea? And again, you can click on unanimous. The decision for the school board was unanimous. All the members agreed that uniforms would be required in the coming school year. So, and then you click on your answer once you've thought of your own answers. Check and see. Some African Americans believed Marshall was pushing desegregation too quickly. They believed that the country was not yet ready for it and feared that if Marshall lost his court case, the entire race could lose more rights as a result. Number 2, explain why Marshall did not believe society could be separate but equal. Again, going back right here. So again, copy and paste that into your Word document. And think of your answer. All right, let's check and see. First, he realized that it was very unlikely that the two races would receive equal resources if kept apart. Money was poured into white institutions, but not into Black. But even more than that, he believed that separating the races gave Black children a sense of being inferior. The sense of inferiority meant that they would never be equal. So again, copy and paste that in, along with whatever you thought was the answer, okay? Module 6. Let me go back. I didn't check to see if we were on slide 5 or on whatever slide, if that was the only slide. It may have been. Let me check. See, there was no slide down here. Okay, so I'm good. We're ready for module 6. See, some of these modules are fairly short. On the front lines with Thurgood Marshall. Now we will read a primary source document, in this case, an interview that gives insight into the civil rights works of Thurgood Marshall. As you read, make predictions based on what you know about interviews and what you've already learned about Marshall. It's important to understand how primary sources documents differ from secondary source documents. As you read, consider the following. What important information can be revealed in an interview? Think about your answer. Let's check it. And again, copy and paste these into that review document. An interview gives firsthand information about a subject. Someone who witnessed an event can give information about details that may be lost in later tellings. Number 2, how does a primary source differ from a secondary source? Think of your answer. Maybe jot it down. Check your answer. A primary source document is a first-hand account of an event. A secondary source document is based on primary source documents. Number 3, and again, copy and paste that question and answer into your review document. Number 3, what do you learn in the interview that could not learn in the story? Think of your answer, jot a couple down, check your answer. In the interview, you get Greenberg's opinion on several topics, including Thurgood Marshall's strengths and motivations. Again, copy and paste that into your review document. To read the interview that gives insight into civil rights work of Thurgood Marshall, visit this website. So we're going to click on it. Hopefully it's going to work. It's going to take a second to load. And there's a picture of Thurgood Marshall. The legal Thurgood Marshall. Justice for All, the legacy of Thurgood Marshall. Enlisting the courts in the civil rights fight. The name of Thurgood Marshall may not be as well known outside the United States as that of its fellow civil rights leader, Martin Luther King Jr. And yet, Marshall's achievements in demolishing the legal structure that sustained racial segregation in the American South advanced the civil rights cause as profoundly as the nonviolent protests led by King. No other American did more to lead our country out of the wilderness of segregation than Thurgood Marshall, said the fellow Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell. Thurgood, actual birth name, Marshall, was born in Baltimore, Maryland on July 2nd, 1908. His father was a railroad porter and his mother was an elementary school teacher. In second grade, young Marshall shortened his name to Thurgood. He graduated from Baltimore's segregated color high school and then Lincoln University, the first institution founded anywhere in the world to provide a higher education in the arts and sciences for youth of African descent. Lincoln produced acclaimed figures such as Marshall's classmate Langston Hughes, a major contributor to the literary Harlem Renaissance, Kwame Nkrumah, and the first leader of independent Ghana, and his Nigerian counterpart, Nnamdi Azikiwe. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say those names. Marshall quickly distinguished himself as a gifted storyteller and a skilled debater. These were among the skills of the successful trial lawyer, and Marshall decided to pursue a career in the law. He aimed to enroll close to home at the University of Maryland Law School. But as a segregated school, Maryland would not admit a Black student. Marshall did not apply, but it was a harsh lesson in the discrimination and resulting lack of opportunity that held back many African Americans. Maryland's law's stance, ironically, opened the door to unexpected opportunity for Marshall. He enrolled instead at a Black institution, Howard University Law School in Washington, D.C. His mother pawned her wedding and engagement rings to pay for the tuition. Marshall excelled at his studies, graduating number 1 in his class in 1933. At Howard Law, Marshall encountered one of the major, if under-celebrated figures of U.S. history, Vice Dean Charles Hamilton Houston. It was Houston who devised the legal strategy that Marshall would employ in courtrooms, from the Deep South to the Supreme Court of the United States, to dismantle the legal segregation that still disadvantaged African Americans. After 1861-65, Civil War and the freeing of the slaves in the American South, the U.S. government approved the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The amendment prohibited a state from depriving any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. But a few years later, white Southerners resorted to segregation of the races, a practice often called Jim Crow. This is a term derived from a song in the 1828 minstrel show where a white man first performed in blackface. An 1896 Supreme Court decision, Plessy v. Ferguson, upheld this practice, ruling that racially separated but equal facilities met the equal protection standard. Houston and Marshall determined to overturn the Plessy decision in the U.S. courts by demonstrating that in the real world, separate separate was never equal. Their strategy required the patient accumulation of facts that supported their point. They also realized that it would take time to get rid of Plessy. They would undermine legal segregation one case at a time. In 1934, Houston began to work for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, an international group founded in 1909 to work for the abolition of segregation and discrimination. He traveled throughout the South to document the appalling state of Black schools for the NAACP. Marshall, who had set up a private legal practice in Baltimore, often accompanied him on these trips. In 1934, Marshall and Houston, as his advisor, won their first victory over legal segregation. In the case Murray versus Pearson, the triumph was especially sweet for Marshall, as the defendant was the very same University of Maryland law school that Marshall once had hoped to attend. In Maryland State Court, Maryland's laws lawyers argued that the school met the separate but equal requirement by granting qualified Black applicants scholarships to enroll at out-of-state schools. In memory of Murray versus Pearson, the state court in Maryland rejected this argument. While the court was not yet prepared to rule against segregation in public schools, it did hold that the alternative opportunities Maryland afforded Black law school applicants were not equal. Maryland law was ordered to admit qualified African American students. After the Murray triumph, Marshall became an NAACP staff lawyer under Houston. In 1940, at the age of 32, he helped found and become the chief of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, dedicated to providing legal assistance to poor African Americans. In that year, he won the first Supreme Court victory, a ruling that the 14th Amendment due to process clause barred the use of coerced confessions. During the 2 decades that followed Murray Marshall, Houston and the NAACP team of civil rights attorneys struck down one pillar after another of segregationist order. In Missouri, example, Real Gaines versus Canada. I'm not going to list all of these. You can read those if you want all the different cases. They're in bullets there. I'm going to pick back up over here. In oral, Marshall would prevail in a staggering 29 of 32 cases. He argued before the Supreme Court. His stunning record reflected the great legal talent that had congregated at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Marshall's shrewdness in selecting cases that would advance the team's long-term strategy of undermining segregation and his own formidable legal skills. He was, United Press International later concluded, an outstanding tactician with exceptional attention to detail and tenacious ability to focus on a goal, and a deep voice that was often termed the loudest in the room. He also possessed a charm so extraordinary that even most intransigent Southern segregationist sheriff could not resist his stories and jokes. Armed with this potent combination of likability and skill, Marshall in 1946 persuaded an all-white Southern jury to acquit 25 Blacks on a charge of rioting. On another occasion, he escaped only narrowly the beatings, or worse, that every assertive African American in the Jim Crow South risked. Even as Thurgood Marshall dismantled the lies and evasions that for so long justified racial segregation, he was stockpiling the experience and wisdom that would carry him to the landmark case Brown versus the Board of Education and beyond. And then it goes on, and I'm not going to read all of it. If you want it, more power to you. If it turns out we need to read all of it, I'll go back and read it. But that's a very long article. Check the following passage from the Greenberg interview. Thurgood Marshall was focused. He always believed in racial integration and wanted to strike down the segregation laws and practices within the United States. I would liken him to General George Marshall during the Second World War. He was the one who got all the troops together from all the different areas, competencies, and abilities, and melded them into a focused unit. So Thurgood Marshall was focused. Is this a fact or opinion? Which would you expect to see in an interview, and why? So is it a fact? Is it an opinion? So again, you can go back. Remember where it asks you to look for fact and opinion? Racial integration. What do you think this phrase means? What hints can you use from what you know about this topic to figure out its meaning? What do you think this phrase means? What hints can you use from what you know about this? It doubled. Racial integration. He was the one who got all the troops together. Is this a simile or a metaphor? Remember, simile uses like or as, metaphor just states it. Number 1, and again, I would copy and paste these questions and answers into your review document. What did Greenberg think of Thurgood Marshall based on this little excerpt here? All right, check your answer. Greenberg respected and looked up to Thurgood Marshall. You can tell by how respectfully and positively he speaks about Marshall. So again, you copy and paste that answer to number 1 in your review document. Number 2, what was Thurgood Marshall's demeanor in fighting for civil rights? Think of your answer. Check it. Thurgood Marshall was a strong leader who was able to communicate and inspire others. The metaphor comparing Marshall to a war leader shows the reader these things. So again, copy and paste the question and answer, along with maybe your thoughts as well, into your review document. Number 3, how would you describe Thurgood Marshall? Write some things down about him. Check your answer. Your answers will vary, but you might describe him as motivated, dedicated, smart, or fierce based on what you've learned about him. So again, copy and paste, question, correct answer, and you can include your thoughts as well in your review document. Then you'll be ready to move on to slide 3. Test yourself on what you've learned from the Greenberg interview. Which statement summarizes the interview? Jack Greenberg tells a story about one court case regarding civil rights. Jack Greenberg remembers the drive and dedication of Thurgood Marshall in his legal pursuit of civil rights. C, Jack Greenberg interviews Thurgood Marshall. Or D, Jack Greenberg talks about why he became a civil rights lawyer. All right, think of your answer. Check it in C. And in this case, just gonna put check. Boop, boop. Yep, that one's right. So you'll copy the question and copy the answer and put that into that review document like we did previously. Anytime you see multiple choice questions, be sure to get those in those review documents. And if you want to see the it doesn't give an explanation. Okay. What is the critical idea of the interview? A, Thurgood Marshall used his legal knowledge and leadership to spend his life fighting for equal rights. B, Jack Greenberg was an important civil rights lawyer who worked with Thurgood Marshall. C, Thurgood Marshall became a lawyer to prove himself to other lawyers. Or D, Thurgood Marshall and Jack Greenberg worked together to end homelessness. Think of your answer. Check it and see. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question and correct answer into your review document. Why is this piece a primary source document? A, because it's told in first person. B, because it is based on real events. C, because it's historical fiction. Or D, because it is first-hand account from someone who experienced the events. Why is this a primary source? Pick your answer, check it. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question and correct answer into your review document, and then you're ready to move on to the last question. Based on what you know about interviews, what might you have predicted? A, that Marshall would become a lawyer. B, that Greenberg would have some personal insight to the person of Thurgood Marshall. C, that Greenberg would make up stories about Marshall. Or D, the end of segregation. Think about your answer. Check it. When you know the right answer, copy and paste the question and correct answer in that review document. And then you're ready to move to slide 4. Thinking about what you read. Now that you have read the informational text in the interview, respond to the following questions. Number 1, what did you learn in the interview that cannot be expressed in the informational text? Maybe jot some things down. Check your answer. Did the interview contain more facts or opinions? Which should be found in an interview? Which should not be found in an informational text? Number 2, what is a primary source? Why are they valuable to the reader? Jot down your ideas and thoughts. Then check your answer. How is a primary source different from a secondary source? What value do these differences have to the reader? So again, it doesn't tell you an answer, it just kind of restates the question there. Number 3, what is a secondary source? How do they contribute to the reader's understanding of a topic? Again, it doesn't give you the answer. It just restates the question. Great. Number 4, what did you learn about Thurgood Marshall in the 2 pieces? And just to help you, what are some characteristics that describe Thurgood Marshall? Why was he an important figure in African American civil rights? Doesn't really give you answers there. You got to use your own brain. All right, once you've got those answered, and I would put the questions and your responses in the review document, then you're ready to go up here and move on to Module 7. Gandhi and Marshall. Gandhi and Thurgood Marshall are similar in many ways. Practice comparing and contrasting these influential people. So put things you know about Gandhi, put things you know about Marshall, and then compare the two. What do they have in common? So what are some things that are only like on Gandhi, only like on Marshall, and that they both have? So this first one is fought for segregation in America. Did Gandhi fight for segregation in America? Did Marshall, or did they both? Well, this one is obvious. Marshall. Fought for equal rights of people in South Africa and in India. Again, this is going to be Gandhi because Marshall did not go to India or South Africa. Was dedicated to rights for all. Okay, that is one that was probably for both. Who memorized the U.S. Constitution as a child? Well, since Gandhi's not from the United States, I'm going to go with Marshall on this one. Who was a lawyer? Well, I think Gandhi was a lawyer, and I believe Marshall was, so this is going to be a both one, I think. Used nonviolent methods to fight for goals. They both did that. Was educated in Britain. That would have to be Gandhi. Lived a simple spiritual life as an adult. I'm going to say Gandhi because he didn't have much clothes and he denied himself food and other things like that. Worked with other lawyers, both African American and white. I'm going to say that's Thurgood Marshall. Let's check. Whoop, 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 whoop. All right, we got it. Now we are ready to move on to equality number 8. If there is an 8, I can't remember if there is or not. Yeah, there is. Vocabulary checkpoint. Before your next assignment, review the module vocabulary you have encountered so far. Check that you have learned the definitions of these words. So if you don't, use that dictionary to look them up. I would copy and paste them. Since we're wrapping up the unit, remember they had all these words at the beginning of the unit in lesson 1. So be sure that you know these. If you don't, look them up, get them written down. Influence, diligent, exaggerate, genuine, unique, controversy, prejudice, equivalent, equality, primary source, secondary source, accept, affect, effect, vivid, dialogue, claim, unanimous, and media. And I would put those in that review document. I would copy and paste those and then copy and paste whatever you decide is the definition, okay? How well were you able to use word families to discover the meaning of the words? Try this example. Thurgood Marshall worked to bring equality to all. The base of the word equality is equal. Equal is an adjective that means the same amount. Equality is used as a noun in the sentence. That helps you figure out that equality means the condition of being equal. Another related word in this word family would be equivalent. Equivalent describes an amount, so it must be an adjective. And we don't have any other slides, so then we're ready to move on once you have completed those definitions and got those in your review document. Okay, it's going to take us out, and it says that we are ready for the next lesson, which is going to be 112, share your story. And we will pick back up with that next time. Thank you for joining me on 111. I hope you found this helpful, and I will see you next time for 112. Bye.